Call to order the meeting of the Yolo Transportation District, meeting for May 12th, 2025. And, roll, can I have a roll call, please? City of Winters? Here. City of West Sacramento is absent. City of Davis?
Here.
City of Woodland?
Here.
County of Yolo?
Here.
And UC Davis?
Here.
Thank you. Thank you for turning on the recording. Our first item will be to approve the agenda. Are there any changes, or would the directors like to see any changes on tonight's agenda?
Motion to approve tonight's agenda is submitted.
All right, motion has been moved by
Second.
French, seconded by Chapman, and let's do the vote. We don't have to do roll call here, so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Sorry, I forgot to turn my sound off here. There it is. All right, the next item will be taking comments from the public regarding matters that are on the consent calendar, items that are not on the agenda but are within the purview of Yolo Transportation District. And we will be limiting our time on public comments to 3 minutes today. Do we have any public comments on items that are not on the agenda tonight? Okay, the chair recognizes Michael Barnbaum.
Good evening. Thank you. Michael Barnbaum, City of Sacramento, County of Sacramento, Sacramento State. I want to welcome everyone back that went earlier this month and to the Cap to Cap trip. Saw the posts from many about their experience on the trip, and it looked wonderful to see. I hope everyone had a great time and that there was a lot accomplished. Looking forward during the item under board member reports to get a recap of your own experience and how successful it was when we get to that item, but more or less tonight for matters that are a big topic and discussion. Looking forward to item 6 to discuss matters about the budget and the short range transit plan and the comprehensive operational analysis, as well as a service topic related to the B line under item number 8 within the city limits here in the city of Woodland. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The chair recognizes Alan Hirsch.
Hi, this is Alan Hirsch. This is on the budget, but it's unrelated. You'll notice on table 3, it gives $4.2 million for from the I-80 project to fund transit, improved transit in Yolo Transportation District. You notice how small the number is compared to how many miles you travel. This is what you're going to get, but you're supposed to generate triple the amount of VMT reduction. And you're truly doing it. So you're reading basically not funding enough.
Because this is you.
I'm talking about I-80 and the funding, and there's not sufficient funding to basically fully mitigate the project that you guys voted on. Thank you.
Is there any public comment online? No public comment online. Any other public comment tonight in person? All right, we're going to move to the consent calendar. Would you like to introduce the consent calendar?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Pretty short consent calendar for you tonight. I think we do have a slide, which looks like Janine is pulling up right now. So in addition to the regular meeting minutes, we have revisions to job classifications for 2 positions here, both in our IT department, which that is a routine matter we bring to the board whenever we make any changes. Neither of these changes has any salary changes. It's just reorganizing and updating the duties. Thank you.
Excellent. I would like to entertain a motion.
So move. Second.
All right, yeah, time. Moved by Vega, seconded by Director Barracks. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, our consent calendar is passed. Moving to the regular calendar for tonight. Our first item is the public hearing for staff vacancies. This is consistent with AB 2561.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We don't have these slides for this. This is another routine item that is, it's actually a new one for us, but this is a new law that was signed by the governor last year that requires public agencies before adopting a budget to hold a public hearing on any staff vacancies. So we would just ask you tonight to please open a public hearing, see if there's any public comment on our vacancies, and if not, you can close a public hearing and we can move on. Thank you.
Are there any clarifying questions from the directors? All right, we're opening a hearing on staff vacancies AB 2561. Are there any comments from the public? Any comments online?
No public comments on that.
Closing the hearing at 6:06. So, entertain the motion. So moved. Sorry. All right, we have a motion by Vega, a second by Burks, I believe. And all in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, motion passes unanimously. Moving on to item number 6. Item number 6 is the Yolo Transit District draft budget for 2025-2026, and it'll be presented by our Executive Director and our Director of Finance, Chaz Pacheco.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I will go ahead and kick us off, and then I'll hand it over to Chaz. So we'll start, I've got to go to the next slide, which has got a quick outline of what we're going to cover tonight. So we'll start with an overview, high-level summary of what's going on with the budget this year. Then we'll talk about our work plan highlights, ongoing and one-time funding sources. This is becoming just kind of a routine reminder, if you will, every year, because our funding is so complicated. We just want to remind you about our high-level sources of funding and how those work. And then I'll hand it over to Chaz, who's going to dive into the preliminary budget details. Next slide, please. Okay, so for a high level overview, the budget for fiscal year 25-26, it maintains our current transit service levels, including all of the recent service expansions that we've been talking about with you over and implementing over the last 6 months or so. We also did do a comprehensive update of our hours and miles, which is how we bill, how we pay for transit service. So Transdev, we pay by the hour and by the mile for each of our services. So we did a kind of a total look to make a new sheet to make sure we were doing it correctly. And as a result, we actually saw a slight decrease in our budgeted hours and miles. No changes to current staffing levels. We do have a 3.84% COLA baked in, assumed in this budget, but that of course is at your discretion. And we have about $7.2 million in new capital project budget appropriations. Next slide. So the next slide just reminds you about the service changes that we have implemented this year. So some of our West Sacramento locals, we brought back some trips. We brought back trips on the express buses from Davis to downtown Sacramento. And then we have a service expansion planned for the future. When the I-80 lanes open, there'll be 16 additional trips on the 42A/B, which will bring us to 30-minute headways all day on the 42A and B. Next slide. This input table that isn't, I don't expect you to be able to see from here, but this is also in the budget document in the packet. This just shows you all of the operations, operating hours and hours and miles for each of our routes throughout our entire system. And what you really see here is that there's no change between last year and this year. Next slide. Table 1.3 is our microtransit annual operating budget. You'll see we actually have a slight decrease in hours for microtransit, and that's because we budgeted conservatively for this year's budget because we weren't sure exactly how much service restoration we were going to do. And in the end, the service expansion that you approved for Winters and Knights Landing was actually a bit lower than what we had budgeted for. So that's why you see about a 5% decrease in our hours and miles, in our hours for microtransit. Next slide. Looks like we accidentally duplicated that slide. Go ahead and go to the next one. For ADA paratransit, you'll see a 1% decrease this year. ADA paratransit, we don't choose the level of service. We're required to provide as many trips as are needed to make sure that people who have mobility challenges and cannot use our fixed route services have access to comparable services. So you can see the chart, the chart shows it starting in about 2020 with the onset of the COVID pandemic. We had very rapid growth in paratransit trips for a couple of years there. And so we had been sort of budgeting accordingly, assuming that service demand was going to continue to grow. We've now seen it start to level off, so we have dialed back our assumptions for how much growth is going to occur. Next slide. Next, I want to talk about the work plan. So our work plan continues to focus on a couple of multi-year projects that are really high priorities that are going to continue to be major priorities for us in the coming fiscal year. The first is, of course, the short-range transit plan, which we talked about quite a bit at our last board meeting. We're going to continue working to deliver the YoloTD managed lanes project. We are, fingers crossed, going to complete planning for a new transit center in Woodland to replace the county farm wall. And we are going to finalize our YATSE, our YOLO Active Transportation Corridors plan that we'll be hearing about later tonight, and conducting design work for 1 to 3 priority segments. A few more multi-year projects, completing our long-range capital improvement plan and zero-emission fleet transition plan, transitioning to new payment methods and phasing out the Connect card. And lastly, educating, engaging, and collaborating to address potential transportation funding shortfalls. This was a priority that kind of emerged through the budget process last year of really wanting to do more education and for the board and stakeholders around what are some of our options, basic understanding of how our transit funding works, and looking at whatever some of our options are for avoiding having to do service cuts in the future based on funding shortfalls. Next slide. So just a few new projects to highlight for the coming year. The first is launching a countywide travel behavior survey to really just kind of establish a baseline about travel patterns in Yolo County. This is something that many counties do on a regular basis to essentially track how travel behavior is changing over time. So we want to, this is something that not just us, but our member jurisdictions can use in terms of general plan updates and other planning efforts to really understand what's happening with travel in the county, and then how future growth, how is that going to be impacted by existing travel patterns. The next one is a big one. It's to procure a new transit operations contract to replace our 2018 TransDev contract. So I've already started working on this, and it's going to be a major push next year. And then the last new priority is to launch a rural transportation needs assessment to better understand the mobility needs and challenges in our rural communities. This is a project that really grew out of a bunch of community engagement we were doing around the YATSE plan, as well as our Beeline, where we were going out to rural communities and asking them about things like active transportation. And we were hearing about lots of other needs and priorities as well. So at the staff level, we'll be working to kind of do more outreach and understand really and look at the data to understand what the needs are in our rural communities, so that as funding opportunities become available, we have some background information that can help us pursue funding to help solve some of those challenges in Yolo County's rural communities. Next slide. All right, next we're going to talk about a little bit of a refresher on our ongoing and one-time funding sources. Go to the next slide. So one of the newest one-time funding sources, the newest sources that we have is SB 125. This was the California Transit Recovery Act that was passed with the governor's budget about 2 years ago. It provides flexible transit funding for the next 2 years. We've so far received about $9.2 million in allocations over 2 cycles via SACOG, and that can be used flexibly for operations and capital projects. It is SACOG who's responsible for allocating those funds. It also creates a transit transformation task force to develop recommendations for how to sustain and improve transit over the long term. I was just at the California Transit Association Legislative Summit last week, where they were talking about what might be coming up in the budget this year. And a big question is whether or not SB 125 is going to be continued, and whether or not there will be additional funding from the state allocated to that. And of course, we'll see the governors may revise this week, and we'll see what happens with that. But a lot of questions about if that doesn't happen, what will it mean for transit agencies like ours once that funding runs out. Next slide. We also, another new source of funding for us is mitigation dollars from the YoloTD project. You heard Mr. Hirsch refer to this during general public comment. We do have some funding there to expand service. And that is expected to start in fiscal year 27-28. And that is already fully funded through mitigation dollars that we've received as part of the construction grant for the first 3 years. And then beyond the first 3 years, if we wanted to continue those service expansions, they could be funded through toll revenue, or we would have to find other funding to continue those service expansions. Next slide. In terms of recurring funding sources for transit operations, there are a few. So on the federal level, we put our primary source of recurring transit funding is our federal 5307 and 5311 funding. There's about 4.3 million available annually for YoloTD, and recently we've been using about 3.4 million of that. And that is, we've been using one-time COVID recovery funds before they expire. So that's been a constraint on using that because we needed to spend down those COVID recovery funds. So we've actually been accumulating these transit funds for a number of years. And we also have local match requirements. So to use these funds for operation, we have to have a one-to-one local match. Next slide. At the state level, that most of our local match comes from funds that we get from the state of California. And that is from our State Transit Assistance, or STA, and Local Transportation Fund, or LTF. Taken together, these are both embodied in the Transportation Development Act of 1971. STA is exclusively for transit. We have about 2.3 million available for fiscal year 24, 25, 26. That's about a 20% decline over last year. This funding source comes from the sales tax of diesel fuels, and so this is tracking presumably a decrease in diesel sales. And then our local transportation fund, which is funded by a general sales tax by the state of California. It is prioritized for transit, and if no unmet transit needs exist, then it can be used for other needs. We use about 47% of this available funding, and the additional funding is used by local jurisdictions for other needs. So the next slide shows you the current breakdown. This was a slide we showed you last year. We've updated it for this year, which shows you what percentage of STA and LTF is being retained by each jurisdiction this year. And you can see it adds up to about 53.8% of the funding is being used by YoloTD, and the other 46% is being retained by jurisdiction. So that's a slight change from last year. We are using a bit more on a percentage basis than we were last year. However, the overall funding amount has gone up. So what it has resulted in is basically no change in the amount of STA and LTF funding that is being retained by the jurisdictions. We'll get into that a little bit more later. So just to give you to put this all together, what does this look like? What you can see is we have about $27.5 million in annual funds available. Of that, we're using about 21.5, and there's about 6 million that is not budgeted, or about 30% of the available funding. So just to give you a picture of how all those funding sources roll up to our budget. And with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to Chaz. Thank you.
Thank you, good evening, Board of Directors. Good to see you all this evening. I put little Post-its on both the packets so we all know where we're looking. Some of the tables are the same tables that you see in the PowerPoint, but the budget book has a little more detail. So I first just kind of want to revisit where we were last year with the budget, because we have some new faces here. So last year, we talked a lot about the TDA funding, which is the STA and LTF funding that Autumn just covered, which is the 40% of diesel and fuel tax funds, as well as the general sales tax. So we spent a lot of time on that last year because the prior year indicated that we might have a deficit. And so we spent time focusing on what we were going to do going forward with restoring transportation or transit services, as well as doing any expansions. So it was a pretty unique balance that we were trying to do last year with many of the budget discussions that we had, both here in the TAC and CAC meetings. And so the 5-year outlook was updated last year, and we weren't seeing that there was any deficit in this current year that we're in future years. So if you fast forward to the last page, you'll see that we're still looking the same. We're not seeing a deficit for this current year that we're proposing, and then the 4 out years. And so we'll get into that a little bit more, and I can answer your questions there, but just kind of wanted to reset us with where we left off last year and some of the things that we were addressing So I'll still be going through the tables that we went through last year, just to kind of familiarize some of our new faces and how we're using the TDA funds that ultimately, do impact the jurisdictions as far as the amount that is being retained. So the first slide we'll go into, and this is something that Autumn already went over, just another highlight of TDA funds, our hot topic last year. State transit assistance, local transportation funds represent about 45% of our budget right now, with the federal money representing about 24 to 25%. So for every federal dollar that we use, we need to have a dollar of local match funds, and that typically comes from the STA and LTF funds. Slide, please. And so this is just a summary of the annual budget by program, and it's showing how much of those program budgets are funded with STA and LTF money there. Administration, fixed route, microtransit, and paratransit. As Autumn mentioned, we did see a decline in the STA funds this year, about 20% of it, with the LTF funding increasing. STA funds, as she mentioned, also is really kind of riding alongside what diesel fuel pricing and sales are doing. So that's the impact that we're seeing on the STA side, as far as we can tell. So this is just a table that's showing how much of those funds are being utilized in each program. Next slide, please. This year, or last year, we provided this slide as well. We were doing a lot of educating on how we were using funds, mostly because of the splits between the TDA funds and what YoloTD and the jurisdictions were retaining, as far as the one-time COVID relief funds that we were drawing down on. So this is a table that's again showing kind of our revenue portfolio and how it represents the funding levels for our operating budget. And then again, here is just a comparison that we're giving. This looks a lot like the tables that you just saw, but just all in a summary, and it's comparing it to the prior year. As you can see, we really aren't making many changes this year. The overall operating budget is only increasing by 2%. A lot of that you'll see is mostly on the administrative side. And then we did a lot of reconciling our budget line items this year. We also, as Autumn mentioned, we did a deeper review of the miles and hours, did some right sizing there. So this net $325,000 increase is really a combination of a number of things that we decreased and a few things that we increased, including indexing for inflation. And then it's also showing again how much of STA and LTF funding that we're proposing to use and that we use as compared to the prior year. Next slide, please. And then this is where I go into just some of the changes. There's a bit of a more description in the budget book itself, where you see the summaries for each administration and the transit services. So for admin, we're seeing an increase of $234,000. So part of that is 3.84 cost of living adjustment. As some of you may recall, we brought in April of 2024, a salary benchmarking survey that we had done. It took us about a year. We were very thorough. We benchmarked many agencies that were like us and some even that weren't quite like us, but they were what we do and they had the same positions. And so with that, we brought our personnel policy to the board as well. And that was to set a benchmark for cost of living adjustments, because that was something that did not exist in our personnel policy. As far as we can tell, we went back about 20 years with no COLAs baked into the policy. And then you're also seeing some health insurance costs increases, and then any related CalPERS increases with pension and any unfunded accrued liability there. One thing that we are doing this year, which about half of it will be non-recurring, is, as you know, we're a small staff. We're staffed about 15 people, and as you heard earlier, we have about 2 staff vacancies. So it's a lot for a team of 13 people and a couple of interns. And some areas we're just, we just don't always have the bandwidth to take on big projects. So we are baking in some professional consulting services, and that includes some legal services, grant writing, to pursue more funding opportunities and help with that, applications, procurement help with some of the major initiatives that we have in the capital plan, getting someone to assist us with those. It takes a lot of staff time to prepare those and manage an RFP or, anything that we're doing with procurement, and then outreach. And then we have a little bit of an additional budget that we didn't have for years, which is furniture and fixtures. And so there's a few workstations that we have, including some chairs that we just need to make some ergonomic corrections. So we just added a little bit of a budget in there as well. And then decreases you're seeing, as I said, we spent a lot of time reviewing our expenses and really looking at what our actual costs are today and some of our plans we have going forward. The previous budget and the year before that, there were some things that we had hoped to accomplish, and some of the things that we budgeted in the operating budget, I found that should really belong in our capital plan because of the size, either the dollar or what it is that we were replacing or rehabbing. So we moved a few things around to better report and have a little more transparency and consistency with what truly is operating versus what are, one-time capital or recurrent capital. And then we also reallocated, we did a number of reallocating. We had some kind of overall costs sitting, sometimes just in one program, maybe in administration for marketing and communications, but we've actually done better with allocating its, proportionate share to fixed route, micro, paratransit, and multimodal, to kind of just really show what the true operating budget is for those programs. And then for technology, materials, and supplies, there was a lot of things, I think, in the 23-24 and 24-25 budget that we were trying to improve and replace. So we moved some of those things to the capital budget. So that's where the netting effect happens, where you see a lot of the increases, but you're also seeing some associated decreases there. And then employee training and travel, I just highlighted this because we were very optimistic having it, a lot of changes in staff, and we're like, okay, well, get this training plan going, and, but I mean, the reality is we just don't have that much time to leave the office or do, much of that training. So we're trying to, do a lot of webinars, seminars, and, things like that. So we did a little reduction of half in that area as well. So we were pretty good in really just revisiting these budget line items and lining them up with actual costs and what we were realistically going to do this year. So that's for the administration budget, where you're seeing a net increase of about 7%. And then on the fixed route, again, there's a 2% increase here. The increases are mostly for the, you see the TransDev normal indexing, which is about 3% of their fixed fee, as well as the hours and miles rate. The biggest one this year that we're seeing is insurance. And so our liability and vehicles insurance went up astronomically, and this is not just specifically for us. We're a part of a pool, and Autumn could probably speak a lot more about, the insurance going up. And then, so that's where we're seeing most of the increases here in the fixed route. And then, of course, adjusting for fuel and associated taxes there. And again, as I mentioned, in the administration changes and increases, the professional and consulting services, we allocated its proportionate share to the different programs. So you'll see the same thing repeated in microtransit and paratransit as well. And then for decreases, one of the things that we did last year is, we do have an aging fleet, as you know. Last year, we, wanted to see what we could do to remedy that because we were facing, procurement issues and turnaround time to get a bus. It's really hard to get a bus. It takes even years to get one. So last year we remedied that by, planning to lease, used buses. And so in the operating budget for fixed route, we budgeted $480,000 to lease, I think it was eight buses. But now we've done a little more research. We're proposing in the capital plan to purchase those used buses. So that's the big, decrease that you'll see in the fixed route operating budget of about almost $500,000. And then again, did some cleanup, right sizing with things that, we're actually doing and what we're actually planning. So, reduction in tools and shop supplies. Some of the bigger things that they were planning, I think in the past couple of years, as I said, really should have belonged in capital purchases, which we've done. So, and then of course, a few other changes in technology, materials and supplies and communications, utility costs. Next slide. And then for microtransit, as we mentioned, we did a review of hours, and then we also, we know what the service is going to be going forward. So you'll see, as a result, the decreases there. So first on the increases, the Transdev 3% annual index, the insurance increase, and then the professional services that you saw in the other areas, and then as well as some materials and supplies reallocated from the administration and fixed route budgets. As I said, there were some things that just kind of were parked in one area, and then we've just been right sizing and allocating its proportionate share to the different programs. And then the decreases are the Transdev costs in service hours for microtransit, and then associated decrease on the fuel as well. And then paratransit, nothing new here either. Again, this was something that Adam mentioned earlier. We don't really plan for these hours and miles, but some of the decrease that you're seeing, we saw that in the past couple of years, we were seeing the increase in paratransit. And so we were kind of right sizing it in the past 2 years, but now that we've actually realigned it to reflect the actual service. So you see a little bit of a decrease there. Again, insurance. And then we also allocated some communications utility to paratransit where it wasn't reporting. And I've said this a couple of times that we've, allocated its proportionate share to the different programs. Another reason why we did this is because when we report on our NTD annual reporting, they require to report on these things. And so paratransit, demand services are reported differently from the mobile bus services. So this is kind of like a two-pronged effort, was just to make sure that we can easily, report on these expenses. Because they're like, it doesn't make sense. You don't have communications in your demand response. So that's another thing we're doing. And then the decreases here is, of course, the hours, a little bit of a reduction in the hours for some of the inflationary assumptions that we had in the past 2 years, and then technology services to align with actual costs. And then Autumn highlighted some of the major capital planning, capital projects and planning initiatives that we have this year. So this is the table. You'll see this at the bottom of those, the capital tables. This is just the summary of what we're doing, or proposing in 25-26. There's a number of projects that we had planned to do in the 24-25 year. But as you heard earlier, we do have sometimes trouble getting these going because, they take time. Procurement takes time, as well as, purchasing buses and things like that. So we are requesting to carry over some of these capital projects and then also additional appropriations or you'll see, a lot of those appropriations are wrapped into big purchases like buses. And then I just kind of go just in general, these are just summary, for administration. This wasn't in, the capital plan. Oh, next slide, Jeanine. There we go, thank you. Capital replacement, this wasn't in our, we didn't have anything for administration. I believe this one involves replacing one of our admin vehicles. But it has a detail, sorry, I'm not remembering what that was. It has a detail in there, and so the AD, the FR, the MM, those all stand for administration, fixed route, microtransit, paratransit, and multimodal. And then for fixed route, you're seeing a reduction in planning efforts. I think we're just where's planning? Or you'll see a reduction in some of the planning efforts. It could just be the shuffling of projects and phases, and then some replacement there, mostly buses. And then microtransit, no changes, no additional capital. Our vehicles are relatively new. And then for paratransit, same thing. We're replacing a few. I think we have a few vehicles planned there as well. And then multi. And then the last one on reserves funding. So this was something that we started last year. And so if you're looking at the capital tables in the actual budget book, this was something that because we don't have a fully kind of asset replacement schedule, we're in the process of doing that. That's folded into the short range transportation plan. We really needed to kind of step back and look at all of our asset inventory, not just the vehicles itself, but really develop some sort of when do we need to replace these so that we can start funding for it over time. And so we added into the capital plan that we wanted to start reserving funds on an annual basis, like a savings account, basically. If funds were available, if unrestricted funds were available, we would put that for capital. And then the 5-year outlook. This is in your presentation, PowerPoint slide deck printouts, as well as the budget book. So this one, this was something that was implemented 2 years ago. And so the previous interim CFO who developed this based it on a constant dollar as of 2023. I kept the same template last year, and I'm keeping the same template this year, just for consistency. As you know, we're going to go into budget workshops, so that'll be kind of more of our time to talk a little bit more about, taking a different approach and adding in a few more assumptions here. But for the most part, I kept the model and added in the final budget for 24-25 that wasn't in there the previous year, as well as our year-end projections. So what you're seeing in the first column where you have the blue font up top is our final budget for this current year, 24-25, was about 2.6, adding the general reserve. And then my year-end projection is about 17.3. So that's mostly due to the delay in the fixed route restorations, where we restored that about halfway through the year. I think it was January 19th when we did that. And then the B line expansion didn't occur until late April. Okay. So that's kind of representing, a majority of those budget savings there, as well as a couple of things, we had staff vacancies for most of the year until we, recently filled a couple of positions with 2 positions still vacant. And then fuel, we were seeing that fuel had its moment of being really, really high. Then we saw it come down a lot, and now we're seeing it creep up. So we're kind of back at, putting those inflators in this year and the years going forward. So, little bit of a surplus there for, 24-25. And then budget savings. So there's the budget savings and then there's the surplus. And so overall, I kept the baseline at, the proposed budget today, for 25-26, and then folding in, kind of like a uniform amount for the state, the STA and local transportation funds based on what we're proposing to use, in 25-26, as well as, the federal funding. So, Autumn mentioned, during her presentation, in one of the slides, that we were utilizing COVID funds for the past couple of years. And in doing that, when you have this influx of one-time COVID relief funds, and then you cut your service in half, which is essentially what we did, right? You have this influx of one-time COVID relief fund, CARES, PRISA, and ARPA, cut your services in half. At that point, they're not lined up. You're not spending it the way that, you're not incurring it, as far as like what is available for you to use. So as a result, we've been utilizing the one-time COVID relief funds and drawing down on those, while the FTA 5307 and 5311 funds have accumulated. So if you're looking at where the FTA lines start, the FTA 5311 and the FTA 5307, I broke these out last year. They used to just be one line, but I broke these out last year, which, sparked a lot of healthy conversation. And so what you're seeing here is I'm not needing a lot of that to end this current year, 24-25, because our plan is to spend the rest of the COVID relief funds. But then in the out years in 25-26 is where you see us ramping up, utilizing those FTA funds. In addition, in those forward years, you're also receiving an annual allocation for those years, in addition to the accumulated funds that we have for the past couple of years. So that's where you're seeing that increase of those. And that is consistent with what we've said in the past 2 years, that once the COVID relief funds were fully drawn down, that we would be utilizing more of the federal funds. And that's the last slide.
I can see how you saved the best for last in that presentation, breakout, the FTA funds.
Yeah.
It's a really expansive presentation and I really appreciate it. Do we have questions? The chair recognizes Director Phillips.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Thanks, Chaz, for the overview. A couple of questions, actually, the last slide, the 5-year sort of outlook, I think it'd be a good one to start on. This is where most of my questions are. If we go back to that slide, please. In the budget book, there's a lot more, like we have footnotes and things like that too. So thanks so much. That's always so appreciated. So a couple quick things. One, just in the sort of outlook, I guess the first question just has to do with the operating expenditure budget, which is basically remains constant in the or just a slight increase, but really basically constant over the course of the next 5 years. Is there any rationale for why we wouldn't, have an assumption that there's gonna be inflation? And sort of build that in, consider what we've seen in the last number of years.
And so keeping this model, as you can see, I did update it because it would have stayed at 21.2.
Yeah.
But I did update it with any of the inflationary factors that, I thought we needed. But if I were to keep this model for the next couple of years, that number is going to keep being updated. It's just kind of spreading it uniformly out across the 5-year outlook. I said this in the CAC and the TAC meeting. It's not my favorite, forecast model. I would like, to have better assumptions in it. I understand the constant dollar model because it really simplifies it at a high level and say, and I think that, if I were to take a good guess, of why, we used the constant dollar 2 years ago when we implemented the Outlook.
Mhm.
It was because it was to show, once the one-time COVID relief funds went away, how the other funding that was accumulated and as well as TDA funding would fold in and how it would impact. So just, kind of kept it uniform across. I'm guessing that's why we used it, used this model 2 years ago. But, my hope is to update this because I do understand when you look at this, especially when we're in a high inflationary, time that, you're expecting to see at least some indexing happening. But I tried to keep it consistent because, I really wanted to crosswalk between what we've done in the past 2 years.
No, thanks, I appreciate it. That's helpful. I think, it's just based on the last couple of years, clearly, there's, it's probably been more than, the sort of, on the average, it's definitely kind of been like that, so it feels like, that might be a safe assumption to sort of, have some adjustment.
Yeah.
Consideration in the future. A couple other items on that same outlook, I think one, has to do with the, increased formula funds item, so which is, there's a footnote for, item 10 or footnote 10, just talking about the increased formula funding may include increased use of Davis UZA funds, pending agreement with Unitrans and City of Davis. We know that's our version of the existing informal agreement is sort of in the process, or that's likely to happen. But the other component is the discretionary SAC UZA funds, which YoloTD has not sought in the last 2 years, but for which we were eligible. And so just would love to sort of, I forget the dollar amounts, but like, what's the dollar amount for like what we could have been eligible for? And then also, why are we not sort of pursuing those? Just curious about that. I really, the rationale for it, but I don't exactly recall.
So I can take part of that. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. What I can say is 12% of the SAC UZA funds are discretionary and are competitively awarded by state cards. My first year here, we did apply for and win some of those, and that's funded the short range transit plan, automatic passenger counters, a few other things. In years 2 and 3, to be quite honest, like we lost our ACE grant writers and we've been spending a huge amount of effort. That would be Jose and Kristen, just FYI. And we've spent a huge amount of, what we found is that there was a lot of grants that we'd applied for that we didn't really have good tracking and we weren't actually following through on the procurement. So we actually took a pause from applying for a bunch of new grants to reconcile everything that we had and really understand when did we have to spend these dollars down? What did we say we were going to do?
Yeah.
And what did it take? So a lot of what you see in terms of the growth of the capital budget were a lot of projects that were already partially funded, but had never been implemented.
Yeah.
And so we're kind of like, let's get our house in order. Let's make sure we spend down the funds we have before we go back and apply for additional funds and make additional commitments.
That's great, I appreciate it. That's actually my third question has to do with the grants, I mean, which is, again, it's in this 5-year outlook. The obtain new competitive grants, there's sort of an assumption of not receiving any dollars towards grants, I get that, good assumption, certainly. But we're also gonna be spending roughly $200,000 on consultants to help us bring in grants, so I mean, I'm kind of in a, we should have a bit of an assumption that there's gonna be some dollars pulled down in grants. I mean, they don't, obviously don't wanna have it be super inflated, but I mean, if we're gonna spend $200,000, roughly 182,000, I think was in the admin category for potential consultants, for grant consultants, like it does not make sense to have some kind of assumed revenue from over the next 5 years coming from grants. So that was a question that I have, and I'm happy to hear if you guys have any response to that.
Yeah, well, if we want to get specific, for the professional consulting services, grant work, is not the majority of the $150,000. It's about 20 per year. So,
Okay.
so with that, as Autumn said, we did take a break. We didn't take, like, it was half and half, where we really had to get a good inventory of what grants were out there, kind of where we were, in the programming phase. The federal funds have, it's 3 different lives where you have to prepare your project, submit it, you know, in the MTIP to SACOG, get that, go through that process, you know, prepare the applications with FTA. So there's a lot of work that goes into it. So we spent a lot of time in the past year just taking a look at all the funding that we have. We worked a lot with SACOG, we worked a lot with FTA, we worked a lot with the state to reconcile balances. As well as reconcile our annual allocations.
Yep.
Reconcile the allocations that were programmed and then the ones that were not. So with you had mentioned the discretionary funds for SAC. So the last time that we received an award, I guess that was when Autumn they applied for it at that time. It was around $307,000. And we've used that. And so that's what we're hoping for. I mean, now we're at a place where we do know a lot more information about where we are with all our federal grants and what needs to happen for us to program it. We're making assumptions for the annual allocations as well as, looking out for when these notices are coming out and going out. We just had conversations last week about, being ready to apply, for discretionary funds. So it's definitely on our radar.
Great, thanks. No, I appreciate that. Thank you. Really helpful. The last question that I have right now, just as on the capital planning projects item and the reserve funding. And so I totally appreciate the sort of adjustment in our attitude, which is like, hey, we should have some reserves on hand as it relates to the capital projects. I think the $2 million in 2024-25 budget, I mean, and then obviously proposal, it's a little over $800,000 set aside for 25-26. Do we, I just don't recall, do we have a policy as, we have a set percentage that we're attempting that's similar to like our actual reserve, general reserve policy? Try and keep it 25%, or is it just what we have available? I mean, last year was 2 million, this year's 800,000, so I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and that is something that I'm used to. I'm from cities. And so I think, our initial attempt at just establishing a reserve.
Yeah.
Happened last year. We really wanted to get this in the capital plan, just to start the conversation about we need to save. But I think as we know more, we have a couple pots on the stove with the SRTP, we're waiting for ABC data, a couple of things. All come together, we'd be better positioned, to really understand what our capital needs are, because we have, hopefully, the hope is that we'll have a capital replacement schedule, and not just for fleet, right? Just, just overall, and then that's kind of telling us what we need to put away, right? You're looking at depreciation, that's the biggest indicator of what you should be matching and having to save. So, I mean, we don't currently have a capital asset policy, and that's where you would usually see the capital, reserve, or it's coupled with a general reserve policy. But I think maybe, it wouldn't hurt to implement one now. It's just kind of a moving target. Right now we're just saying, hey, if we have some savings,
Yeah.
let's put it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
If I can just piggyback on that really quick, I'll also say we've been doing a ton of work at the staff level around developing a long-range capital improvement plan. So like a 10-year capital improvement plan, which we have on your long-range calendar for September. So that work is largely done. And so I think that's going to be a sobering presentation when we look at both just in terms of replacing our aging fleet and also the zero emission fleet transition requirements we have from the California Air Resources Board, some of which we're hearing rumors now that the Air Resources Board is maybe starting to be a bit more flexible in terms of thinking about what they're asking transit agencies to do at a time when transit funding is like falling off of a cliff. But nonetheless, our current plan does assume that we'll be, adhering with that policy as it currently. And so I think this kind of concept of having a capital asset policy and putting money in reserves towards that is going to be really, really important, and something maybe we should think about when we do our capital improvement plan.
Thanks for all the responses. Thank you.
Welcome. Awesome questions. The chair recognizes Director Chuck.
Thank you. Thank you, Chaz. Thank you for your questions, Director Frericks, touched on some of the ones that I was thinking about as well. If we have the 5-year piece again that we had up when Director Frericks was talking, I was gonna start there with a few questions. I would like to just make a note that I do think that finding some sort of inflation or COLA in the long-term planning, I think would be important for us to do, aside from inflation. I just think that when you step back and look at it, we can make some sort of an assumption and be nearest the ballpark, 1% or 1.5, whatever that is. So I think I'd like to see something like that come forward. And then on this chart here, does this take into account the dollars that we'll need to allocate for the new transit operator contract? Where is that captured?
It does, and it does in this current. In the proposed budget, so we did put an assumption in there, for a new contract or an amendment to the contract. But again, this just uniformly, has the the operating budget across the last 4 years. But it is folded into this proposed budget,
Where is that found?
it's within the program, the fixed route, microtransit and paratransit. It's folded into the operating budget.
But to be clear, that's just the cost escalator that's built into our existing contract, assuming that continues, right?
Right.
Not,
But they
not
could-
what could be a potentially significantly larger increase with a new contract.
I mean, I would assume that there's gonna be a large increase, even if it's with Transdev, that there's gonna be, since this was negotiated in 2018, that there's gonna be significant cost increases to YTD.
Mhm.
So where do we account for that in this budget moving forward? When that's coming up, when are we doing that, those negotiations?
So what the plan is to release an RFP in December.
Okay.
And then get responses, then we'd be negotiating that in the spring, with a contract to take effect in August of 2026. Yeah.
So a year from, well,
Yeah, essentially a year from now, yeah.
okay,
So it's not showing up in this year's budget, but it would show up in the 5-year outlook, I think.
but it's not in the 5-year outlook.
But it's not in the 5-year outlook, that's correct, because we're holding costs and revenues constant in the 5-year outlook.
So one of the things that I did with this budget is we factored in the annual inflator with the transit contract that we have now, year 8. But I did add in an inflator of an additional 2% on microtransit and 2% on fixed route. But I mean, it's probably not obviously enough, but that was a small adjustment that I made in the operating budget for Transdev or future contractor.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess that just gives me heartburn, right? We're sitting here looking at a budget that's a 5-year projection, knowing that we have like extremely, probably a pretty significant increase in costs, and we're not accounting for that.
Right.
So I don't,
If I may.
or
I
maybe
mean,
I'm not saying that correctly, I just don't.
even from just strictly from a kind of pre-positioning ourselves for negotiations, if we conservatively build in a 10% cost increase annually, all of the potential bidders on that contract are going to see that. Right, and so if we say we think it's gonna be 6%,
Sure.
think it's gonna be 8%, we think it's gonna be 12%, that's a public document.
Sure.
So I think there is value in not, I absolutely hear the concern. I also think there's value in not us, baking in essentially an assumption about how much more that contract is going to be from a, kind of trying to get a competitive bid.
Okay, and then, the 3.84%, and maybe I missed this in the 3.8% that we'll be discussing later in Kohler, is there a dollar amount that's attached to that? Do you know what that is? I may have missed it, I apologize if I did.
No, let me see. Hold on a second. It's 108,000.
Okay. Great, and then the last thing on this, on the 5-year piece, you mentioned, I think when Director Ferris asked the question, you talked about hopefully being able to get what you need to upgrade away from the constant dollar model. What do you need to move away from that? Is it a time and bandwidth issue internally? Is it finance? Like what
No,
was
that's a
the?
great question. Yes, it is time and bandwidth at times. However, I mean, I just need the word to go ahead and make these changes. I mean, honestly, there's things that I've just kind of inherited and
Sure.
I've kept it this way.
Yep.
But I would love to do an update to this.
Sure, yeah, and I appreciate your honesty with that, and I would just tip my hat towards having that come back at some point and having some sort of a presentation from you on what the benefits of this model, a different model, what that means, what that looks like, and how we can move towards that. I know we're right in the middle of budget season right now, and you have a lot on your plate, you have a lot on your plate, even outside budget season, but if it's something I would be interested in hearing from you on that and being able to step back and look at a more accurate 5-year projection, I think would be really important.
Yeah, and it's this, we had the same comments, the CAC meeting and the TAC meeting, so echoed But yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And we did say when we implemented the 5-year outlook, I wasn't here, but we said it again last year, is that any updates that we could make even throughout the year, that we would communicate it with the board.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
if I find that time, that.
Couple last questions. On the slide that was recurring and one-time funds. I don't know it's between the FTA, STA, one where it's got broken down annual funding source, amount available, budgeted. It shows that there's, it has a chart where it shows amount available of STA, LTF 15.7, and then budget. Then under here, it's federal formula transit funds of $5 million. And it shows amount not budgeted 0, and then a percentage of 21% not budgeted. What's that coming from?
Is it
The one that's right after the circles with the amount that we
the one
retain.
after the balloons, you mean,
Yeah.
with the percentages?
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, right after the-
One more down.
Yeah.
Yeah, that. See how it shows 0? Right,
That's it, sorry, that's my error, I missed that.
so there's that's, is there a percent that's not budget or it's fully budgeted?
It's fully budgeted,
Okay,
sorry.
And then can you explain, no, let me start, what the 6 million is? Annual funds, so that's just the carryover from up top,
That's the difference between amount
The-
available and what we're using.
the 15 and the 9.
Mhm.
Okay, great, perfect, thank you. And then, I don't know if it was on the presentation, but in our packet on page 36, there's table 1.1C. Can you just touch on some of these? It's this one, it looks like this.
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
Can you just, there's pretty significant what look to be reductions, changes and allocations to all the jurisdictions that are part of, can you just walk through what I'm reading and pick Davis and Woodland or whomever,
Sure.
and just kind of see where these, like, there's a 34% change specifically in Davis, right? So, I mean, where does some of these, just kind of walk through what we're reading here?
Okay,
That's page 36 in the.
36, yeah.
36. I don't know if you have the packet handy.
The slide?
No, the page in the packet. Not in the slides.
so this is the ST and LTF table. So what you're seeing on the top piece, let's just go with Davis. The top piece is what was allocated to Davis in STA and LTF funding. So you're seeing the comparison go from 1,008,000 last year to 661 in the STA allocation. And then you see a little, a bit of a 14% increase on the LTF.
And where are those, and who makes the decision on where those cuts happen or what why is it 34%? Who makes that decision? That's not a YTD
Oh,
decision, right? So
no,
it's
no,
coming
no.
from the state,
Yeah, this is
and where's?
strictly driven from diesel and fuel.
Diesel and
Tax,
sales tax,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, there's no, hey, let's give them 34%. It's just what it. was.
So this is, in your presentation, you talked about the diesel and the sales tax, so this 34% would be the reduction in diesel sales. And then the increase on that is for the sales tax.
That's, yeah, from what I mean, I can't speak. for
Sure,
sure,
you
but
know,
That's where it's driven.
That's what it's driven by. And where does that percentage come from? Like, why is it 34%? Why is it 14? Is that a state
That's
formula?
from the state, yeah. Maybe when we do our budget workshops, we are
Okay.
going to have.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
Chad Edison, who will be one of your guest speakers on May 27th, he will be the person to ask.
Yeah,
Okay. All right, thank you.
Chad, not Chas.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chaz. Thank you, Chair.
Really great questions. Before we move on, I just had a clarifying question. You said you want a more accurate 5-year projection away from the constant dollar, and was that to include the grant projections that Director Ferris mentioned?
I think all of it.
Okay.
Really, I mean, anything new that we learn about our funding, whether it's one time or changes in, formula, fund allocations or TDA money. I think it should all be updated, to include, those inflationary assumptions or any expected increases.
All right, thank you very much. Director Becca, do you have a question? At this time. Do we have any other follow-up questions? Okay. This is an information only item, so we don't need to vote on accepting that part. Oh, we have public comment, sorry. The public is here. I'd like to open this for the public comment in person. The chair recognizes Mr. Hirsch, yeah. And we're still doing 3 minutes.
Hi, this is Alan Hirsch. That's a very impressive piece of work. It's like the alphabet soup and all the different sources of coming together, all bringing the offset. This is an amazing project. I'm quite concerned, well, first place, the slide should be numbered, so we can refer back and forth to the slides for the future. Can we number the slides in the packet? Thank you very much. The trouble is that this packet doesn't give you the information you want. You can't control the funding sources, but you can't control where they're spent. And I don't see any comparisons of, so come to benchmarks or numbers. I don't see cost per passenger mile, cost per VMT, number of riders. Yeah, I just don't see the numbers where I can really normalize things and compare things, where you can make decisions whether the money is being spent effectively or ineffectively. And that's where you really have control here, not the funding sources. So I don't think this is a very complete document in giving you board members the information you need to make decisions whether the money is well spent and whatever. I'm kind of, I talked about, if you were in a business, you would be very concerned about sales, right? That'd be that's what the output you're trying to get. But I only see in this 34 pages of slides, I only see ridership mentioned twice. And I don't think passengers are never mentioned once except with passenger fares. And this that we're trying to produce here in this agency, the passengers and ridership and whatever, I don't see any discussion of this thing and how the money is being turned into that output. We're not being paid we're doing this thing to run empty buses around town. We want to get people in the buses and people in the microtransit. I don't see any comparison or numbers here, whether they have any growth or non-growth or whatever. I know some of this is out of our control, but we should have a robust discussion about that. That's really what we're all about here. I just don't see that here. I mean, we balanced the budget, we figured out where the money is coming from, and we can run the buses around because we have this nice fixed contract with Grandstand. I don't see the analysis and robustness about that. And if we had some numbers about cost per rider, cost per buses, people per bus and people per mile, we could actually do a comparison with other peer agencies, see how we're doing. To see whether we're doing well, doing poorly. Or maybe we should work with adjustments. I don't see any numbers that I can compare with. They're just numbers, 20 million and 12 figures of numbers, but I don't see any comparisons where I can do things. This divided by that, so I have some normalization. So this is kind of disappointing. And it's not like I haven't brought this up before. I brought this up 9-10 months ago. I brought this up with the previous executive director. You know that. I know you're new at staff here, but I don't see any recognition or any progress there. So this is kind of disappointing, and I think this is what we need to do to make their agency accountable. And also, I see eyes glazing over some of the board members because the numbers don't mean anything. If we had actual dollars per mile, things that we actually can understand them, we could deal with them. So thank you for listening. Thank you for your hard work. This was an impressive piece of work, but I don't think it gets to the heart of what we're trying to do here.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, Chair.
At just our last meeting, you saw the existing conditions report for our short range transit plan and comprehensive operations assessment, which did include draft performance measures to how, and we included some of the metrics that Mr. Hirsch was looking at in terms of, which of our routes have high transit ridership, which ones are efficient in terms of cost per passenger. So with the short range transit plan and the adoption of new performance measures as part of that, and with our new automatic passenger counters, we will be able to track that performance in a way that we haven't in the past. We do hear you. It's an important comment. You're not wrong. So we hope with our new SRTP and those new performance measures to be able to track and report on a whole wider range of metrics going forward. So I appreciate the comment, and I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Chair. Recognizes Mr. Palmer.
Thank you, Vice Chair Lauren and members of the board. First of all, I want to thank staff for a very comprehensive presentation and work put out here in item number 6. Looks like a lot of hours and time went into compiling this and making the presentation that was done today. I do have some comments because I think in the budget, we want to look at some of the things in the work plan. And I kind of want to put on the table some of the priorities under half a dozen of the bullet points here that I have. Thank you to member Chapman. First one is procure a new transit operations contract to replace the current 2018 contract with TransDev. I'm somewhat familiar with some background on this topic with some other providers just in the SACOG region. And if there was an item before you, I would be very open and flexible to this as it's introduced today. Either to extend the contract with TransDev, look at a contract with MV Transportation, which operates the contract currently for Roseville Transit. Open a contract with Storer Coach Lines, which operates both the Yuba Sutter transit service, as well as South County Transit Link, including but not limited to the Galt Sacramento Express service, with 3 trips every weekday, and the Highway 99 service from Cosumnes River College to Galt and Lodi. Also complete the short-range transit plan and comprehensive operational analysis to envision the future of Yolo bus services in the next 5 to 7 years. Some of the priorities I have on that. Number 1 is getting a fixed route service in the city of Winters. You've heard my concept from the Davis Amtrak station via Russell and Highway 128 and Interstate 505 to the Vacaville Intermodal Station or Transit Center to cover the general concept of a fixed route. Most of us, of course, are here because of the 42A and B, but that leaves Winters out when you just focus on the 42A and B. And those are in the presentation today to go to every 30 minutes, but not until the Summer Olympic Games come back, and it will be in California in July of 2028. The other thing is transition to new payment methods and phase out Connect Card. I hope we're talking. Final comment here. I hope we're talking to vendors like Alta California Regional Center, which supplies Connect Cards to their clients, that this is something that's going to be a talking point and conversation with vendors like them to make the transition simple, easy, and smooth for people to understand in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other in-person public comments? Do we have any public comments online?
No public comments online.
Do any of the directors wish to make any comments on the public comments that were brought up today? All right. I guess I'm still ruminating on the whole subject, so I'll just leave it there and move on to item number 7. We'll be receiving an update on the Yolo Active Transportation Porter Yacht C, and this will be with Lomelli and Avenat. Thank you so much.
Thank
It was really in depth. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Jess.
Evening, Vice Chair Warren, Board of Directors. Thanks for the opportunity to present this item tonight. It relates to the Yolo Active Transportation Corridors project, which we've been working on over the last couple of years. We last briefed the board in October of 2024 at the completion of our phase 1 outreach. And we made substantial progress on the project, and we're at an important milestone we've known has been coming. And we're excited to build on the momentum in the planning process and advancing some real projects. Today's presentation will focus on accomplishments since our last project update. But before we start, I do want to recognize and commend the efforts of our project manager, Brenda Lumley. She's our assistant planner and has been responsible for the day-to-day management of the project, including grant funding reporting and compliance. managing our consulting team, hosting and participating in over 35 different events throughout the county and 2 outreach phases to promote the project. She's made significant strides and we're really proud of her work on this as a project manager. So just wanted to make sure that she was acknowledged in that way. Also like to introduce Adrian Engel, who's a principal with Fair and Pierce. He's out in the audience right now. Once Brenda is finished with the slide she'll present on, then he'll look at her and replace her. So he's been.
Nobody replaces Brenda.
We'll substitute.
Second that.
And so he's with Fair and Pierce and he'll be assisting with the presentation of this. So with those opening remarks complete, let's take a look at why we're here today. So next slide, please. Oh, it's so far away, I've got to use my paper slide. So Brenda's gonna help us go through the phase 2 outreach review and all the work that was done with respect to that task in the project. And then we're gonna review the draft prioritization criteria that sort of defines the the metrics by which we would prioritize specific corridors, because we have so many, the needs are so great, the distances are so far, and the resources are so scarce that we really do have to prioritize which projects we think are the most important and can move before others. And then we'll close out with some recommendations that we're asking from you to approve tonight. So next slide. Phase 2 public outreach. I'll just start off with a goal and then the next slide Brenda will take over. So the goal of the phase 2 was really to go back out to the communities that we visited in phase 1 and show them that we had listened to what their concerns and their aspirations were and how we were applying it into lines on the map and recommendations that we were thinking we might put forward to the board, within their unincorporated communities. So that was a huge effort. I would say the biggest challenge in phase 2 public outreach is just promoting them and getting people in very small communities interested and wanting to participate in a process like this. But Brenda worked extremely hard and was very successful in getting meaningful input from those communities, and I'll let her share the product of her work.
Thank you. So yeah, as a project manager, it was really important for me to ensure that we were gonna go to these, I grew up in Yolo County, grew up in Woodland. And I was extremely excited to know that, I was gonna kind of be in charge of the strategy when it came out to the outreach for phase 1 and phase 2, and I learned a lot in phase 1. And again, the goal here was to ensure that we got the best feedback from those communities, but at the same time, it mattered to me to ensure that, we were inclusive, to all folks, to ensure that their voices were heard. So that was always the goal, and that's something that I always share with Fair and Peers to ensure that, everything was translated in English and Spanish, or in West Sac, we were in West Sac, that, we had a translator in Russian, or documents were translated in those languages. And yes, if you look at the map on the next slide, Janine, it shows 11 communities, right? So it just looks like a small number. But I also want to kind of emphasize that our staff, right, YoloTD staff, did the majority of the heavy lifting here. And as we know, after COVID and the pandemic, a lot of folks don't want to come out of their house and give input. So, our goal really was out there. We were in, laundry mats, posting different flyers. I was talking to my neighbors, I was ensuring that, my daughter's school, gymnastics, everything that I could really go out to. And again, encouraging folks that their opinion really matters. And I think one thing that really stuck out, that I used to tell them, I live in Davis. And I want to make sure that your community, right, your infrastructure, your lighting, and everything that you need to actually thrive in these beautiful small communities, I want you to voice it. And again, I will be at the door, talking to folks, letting them know how, they're safe more than anything. And yes, we're a government agency, but, their opinion really matters to me and to our team. So again, I wanted to present this slide because I think it's really critical to understand that, their feedback is, their little stepping stone for them to have, a better community in the outskirts and the outlines. So again, another interesting thing that I found was that they want the same things than Davis and Woodland folks want, right? They want safety, they want lighting, they want able, some of the ladies told me that they wanted a runabout so they could walk and, do exercising and, so I just found it kind of interesting that, the outside communities, they wanted more like connectivity, but these little small towns wanted more, community-based stuff that they could do for themselves. So, again, just want to kind of emphasize that the staff did an amazing job, when it came to marketing these outreach events. So a lot of heavy lifting, a lot of hard nights, but I'm really proud of the team. And just, again, it matters to me to hear the Yolo County voices, especially in those communities that sometimes they feel that they have been forgotten. So, thank you.
Great, thanks Brenda. As Brenda departs, we'll invite Adrian to come up to the table. We can move on to the next. Yeah, this slide is the correct one. So we did the community outreach events that you saw on the previous slide. We also had extensive online engagement available to people throughout phase 2 of our outreach process. And we started, people could log into the tool and they could give us, their input on some of the proposed improvements that we were looking at within their community. So, next slide. Some of those public outreach themes that Brenda was referencing was, a lot of this is really focused interior to the unincorporated communities themselves and not necessarily the segments in between that we're connecting, because this project also looks within the unincorporated communities and targets infrastructure improvements there as well. So we're hearing concerns about safety, walking, bicycling, rolling, wanting to see more basic infrastructure like sidewalks, safe crosswalks, bikeways, and wanting to see traffic speeds addressed through traffic calming measures. And in some cases, we have seen skepticism of the bike paths and their effects on existing communities and farming, which we're seeing occurring in West Sacramento. So that was sort of unique to that particular location because there's a project that's advancing there ahead of this plan. So I think this is where I turned it over to you, right, Adrian?
Yep, so on the
Next
next,
slide.
on the next slide, the information that we presented to these community workshops came in 2 forms. One was a map for each of the 6 communities that we came to that had active transportation improvements, walking, biking, crosswalks, those types of things at a community level. So these maps will work with Yolo County staff to approve as their active transportation plan to be able to qualify these communities for future ATP funding and help augment their ATP and general plan. On the next slide, we also received feedback on the inter-community connections or the heart of the YATSE project that's looking at the trails across the community. I will say that many of the community members that spoke about their local communities also had desires to get connections to their neighboring communities. So as we talked to people in Madison, the connections to Sparto, people in Yolo, wanting to get easier access to Woodland and so forth. We also talked to many of the people that ride in Yolo County on a regular basis to learn a little bit more detail about the existing routes on the county roads, which places, which destinations they try to get to, and where they try to avoid. So we used that information through the prioritization process. This map was also used to identify a suite of 43 different trail segments across the county that we then brought forward through the prioritization process. So I will spend a few minutes and talk about this prioritization process, which will lead into Brian's ask of you tonight. So we started with 10 criteria, boiled it down to 9 eventually. But the criteria are based on the community feedback that we heard during our phase 2 outreach. It focused on 2 main criteria. The first was safety, as Brian mentioned, was the #1 thing we heard in all of the different communities. So we have two different criteria that we used as a proxy for safety. One was looking at the county roads or the highways, that would be the alternate route to the trails that connect to those communities. So if the trail doesn't exist, where do those people have to ride? And what's the condition on that facility to try to have a proxy? The second was looking for locations where there were existing collisions for people walking and biking in the community. And using both of those to try to figure out where a trail in the near term or the high priority projects would have the most impact. The other 7 criteria really looked at access to destinations. And there's a whole suite of different things like schools, parks, grocery stores, recreational activities, service centers, those types of things. And trying to figure out where in the community those things are located and which communities have them and which communities don't, and which trails would then help provide access to those destinations. And then finally, we looked at some of the disadvantaged community criteria. One being the equity quality index from Caltrans was used to help identify priority trails, as well as looking at some of the unincorporated, affordable and migrant housing communities throughout Yolo County that tend to be have lack of services and a lack of access. So we took the prioritization criteria to the technical advisory committee that had staff from many of your agencies involved and got feedback on that. So on the next slide, some of the things that the local staff helped us with was adding additional information about roadway characteristics to be able to make our map more dense, more rich, as well as some specific destination data that wasn't available for online resources. So really trying to understand where some of the service centers were, affordable housing locations and such. We did have a pretty robust conversation with them through our scoring criteria about how to score trails that connect communities together and whether communities were equal when it came to those connections. And what we determined through that process was trails that connected a underserved community to a city that had lots of services should be a higher priority than trails that connected either two cities together or two unincorporated communities together, because you'd be providing access to these services that a population typically has to drive to today. So that was one of the things that helped elevated certain projects on the map forward. We also expanded the definition of some of our recreational areas. So
Can I just ask you a clarifying question? So if you're looking at, say, Madison and Sparta, but Sparta isn't really a city, it's just a designated population area. How do you put that on the grid? I don't understand.
So we were looking at different criteria with the density of the types of destinations within those places. So for instance, the numbers of schools and parks or recreational activities, the number of grocery stores, the number of medical facilities within those communities, and we used those as magnets. And so a trail that would connect an unserved community to a community with those services would get higher ranking through that process.
Thank you, that makes sense.
We also spent some time talking about recreational activities as being one of the components of the plan like this. And so some of the trails had higher value that followed some of our existing creek corridors versus the ones that followed the highways. So we saw some bonus points from the aesthetic and the value of those trails over each other, as well as some of the trails that provided access to this fishing and other recreational destinations within the community, where they're already being served today by some of our levee roads and other locations. And then finally, as I mentioned, we had Caltrans in our technical advisory committee as well, and they helped vet some of our equity indices that we were talking through because of some of the changes at the federal level. We wanted to make sure it was still relevant to this process and would make these projects competitive for state fundings, if not federal as well, when it came to equity. On the next slide are some of the basic results that we had as we started doing the evaluation. And as mentioned, the higher priority trails typically directly connected a low population community within Yolo County to one of the more populous cities that had services and destinations. So you'll see many of the highest priority trails radiate from Woodland, West Sacramento, or Davis and connect into one of the neighboring communities. This also paralleled with the population densities and many of the roadways that had higher speeds and more traffic and more negative outcomes when it came to traffic collisions as well. And so many of those criteria stacked on top of each other to elevate certain projects in that first tier. I do want to point out, though, is as the trail network starts to get built out, the subsequent communities within those alignments will start receiving higher priority in this process as you'll start connecting more sort of daisy chaining communities together through that trail. But that first link connecting into those cities tended to be the most impactful when it came to looking at the criteria. I will say as Brian gets into the projects that we're looking at, mentioned the Davis to Woodland project specifically. That one didn't score as high as some of the others. It scored very well in the safety criteria. It had some of the higher, faster, busier roads, plus some of the existing collision data. It had most collisions because of the current uses that are out there. It also connected two large population centers together, which helped it score. Where it didn't score well, we're connecting those unincorporated communities to those cities. And so it kind of fell in the middle of in those criteria. But we do think it has a big importance in terms of building the network out and providing access to a wider variety of services and places like the university as well.
So that leads us to the staff recommendations. Hopefully, Adrian's explanation provides some insight into how the evaluation system worked and how, you know, the segments that you see on the maps were prioritized. So based on sort of the outcomes of that evaluation, there's two segments that we would like your support for advancing to design, because recall the RAISE grant fund that we have covered costs for planning and outreach, which we're wrapping up now. And then also funding for design that gets us to a more real construction project where we can start to look at external funding sources for capital funding. And so, you know, the two segments that we're looking at advancing are that approximately 2.5 mile segment between Madison and Esparto, to connect those two communities because they don't have an alternative, you know, to driving to reach each other and their interdependence. And then also, as Adrian referenced, the Davis to Woodland connection. And you know, you can see there's like four different possibilities, but we're really going to focus on the County Road 102 to County Road 27 to Harry Lorenzo Avenue sort of alignment. And so we can talk about that if you have an interest in a moment. So we also want to highlight in the next slide that there are other projects that are sort of being grandfathered into the OTC because they had been considered high priority projects within those communities. And one is being led by the city of Winters in partnership with Yolo County, connecting the El Rio Via affordable housing complex to the town of Winters or the city of Winters. And then also the city of West Sacramento, their Clarksburg branch line trail extension to the city, to the town of Clarksburg. And so that's gonna be, you know, that's a long segment on an old railway corridor. The city of West Sacramento has owned that right of way for I think about 20 years. So those are two projects that are actually sort of ahead of where we are with the two segments that we're seeking their approval for today. Next slide, please. So this map just shows you the spatial distribution of all the projects across the county. It just so happens, not intentionally, but more coincidentally, next slide, that that the four projects that have momentum behind them and are moving forward, hopefully, seem to spans the spectrum of the 5 Yolo County supervisory districts. So it's a nice sort of symmetry that, you know, all of the county districts have a project that will benefit them, and also all the major population centers in Yolo County will also have a project from which they can benefit. And if we were able to get, you know, four segments of this plan, you know, constructed in a 5 to 10 year time frame, I would consider that, you know, a huge success for the implementation of the plan. Next slide. So next steps, back a week ago on May 5th, we brought the same presentation to the Citizens Advisory Committee, and they did unanimously support of the two segments that we recommended, and today we're here presenting to you. And then we also recognize that the county is gonna need to be a significant partner with us in most of these, since many of these segments are in the unincorporated county. We've had extensive conversations with them. We've also had extensive conversations with Caltrans District 3. We've been really productive and a lot of goodwill and optimism about being able to work together on these projects. But specifically because the county is going to be using this as a replacement to their 2013 active transportation plan. Because we want to go through their TAC and also get the Board of Supervisors support for these two segments before we actually, come back to this board, probably as a consent item if everything goes well, to amend the contract and to initiate work towards design. I think that, next slide. So these are just the actions. We went through those before. The second recommendation is the direct staff to provide an update and seek concurrence from the Yolo County Board of Supervisors. Again, that support that I referenced. And before I conclude the presentation, just wanted to let you know that today we did receive through email some public comment letters that I believe have been printed and provided to you this evening. So I'll stop there and happy to answer any comments, like questions.
Thought that I would present the letters received when it was public comment period. Do directors have comments or questions on it? Chair recognizes Director Ferris.
Just firstly, thanks so much to everybody who's been involved in this entire process. Brenda, specifically, thank you for all the outreach, extensive outreach that's happened on this process. Really, really appreciate it. I think a couple of quick things. Just a question. Really, so first of all, one quick comment. I support all the projects, right? They're fantastic. I mean, these all make a lot of sense. There's no surprise why they were sort of ranked the way they were. The real question fundamentally, and I think they're all fundable. Like, I mean, I think we have a very good opportunity across all four of these projects over the next number of years to have them basically all be funded by, some sort of version of federal dollars, but probably state and sort of regional SACOG dollars and such. So really excited about all of them. The fundamental question I have, and it's not, I don't know that you all have an answer for it, but it's just, then what? They get built and then there's no money to actually do any kind of maintenance and upkeep of them. Because we have that exact problem right now. The bike paths that are great, the great separated bike paths that exist in the county right now, the county has no funds to maintain them. On a daily basis, I have people contacting me because the Russell bike path that runs from Davis halfway to Winters is in poor condition. We do little bits of, I'll just say it, fudge the usage of some of the dollars and get out there and do a little patching here and there, but we actually have no real ability to maintain that bike path. I am completely in support of doing this. Like, I am more alternative modes, huge biker myself, but honestly, like, that is a huge issue for me. And so and by state law, we're not allowed to use sort of road repaving dollars for bike paths. So I'm just, what do we do as a, these are all fantastic. We will build them. They're going to be well used, but then what?
It's a really good question. It came up at the CAC meeting as well. Something we've been thinking about throughout this process, because we don't want to just place in the county's lap all the, maintenance, obligations of these new facilities. And so, we're gonna have to get creative. I mean, I think that we'll need to be having more discussions about, what are the possibilities in terms of, different revenue sources. If YoloTD needs to have a role in, maintaining the new facilities, maybe that's an opportunity, but just knowing that the county isn't resourced to really be able to, they'll own and maintain them, right? But they're not gonna be able to afford to do that solely by themselves. So that's front and center on our mind. The other, one thing that can really, I think, sort of buy us a lot of time for some of those, funding mechanisms to fall into place, whether it's a transportation revenue measure, this countywide or something like that down the future is, if different construction materials have different lifespans, right? So if, let's say if we spend more upfront with grant funding to use concrete instead of asphalt, now we bought ourselves 30, 40 years before maintenance really becomes an issue. Not saying that it's not important, but just sort of thinking about, putting ourselves in the best position to maintain these over time.
Thanks, I appreciate it. I think one good comment, just as, especially along the lines of some potential revenue measure. I mean, the discussions have been sort of tossed about, around about for a number of years about, potentially going to a self-help county sort of sales tax measure and things, and that is, it brings in a, chunk of change, but it's, nothing, I mean, it's 5 million a year or something, which is not, no money, that's decent dollars in terms of, but it's, 5 million a year. $1 million mile, that kind of stuff. I mean, I think it can be a real challenge. So I think there's just gotta be, and I really appreciate the sort of thoughts around like potential, doing, potentially spend the money up front, do concrete, sort of longer lifespan, things of that nature. So that makes a lot of sense. But just, very supportive, very supportive of moving forward. Just worry about like they get built, they get loved to death, then what do we do? How do we keep them up to be able to be used in the future?
Thank you so much for your comments. No, Protector. No, but I want to say as a board member here, but also a former teacher in Sparta, that that the same problems that exist with winters and the El Rio Via people not being able to get across the highway, not being able to get to the doctor, not being able to get to the store, not being able to safely cross except in a school bus or car. Those are all happening to the people in Madison. It's very isolating. It's not great for mental health. I mean, there's a lot of other benefits, health benefits, benefits for well-being. So I wholeheartedly support it, and I'm really glad that they are a priority. Any other comments before we go to public comment? Okay. We received several comments, and they are all support comments. They're all very supportive of Woodland Davis Class 1 bike path, of another one for Woodland Davis bike path, et cetera. There's several, all in support of the work that is on item 7. So with that said, any comments of the public in person? Come on up.
Fives here. I'd like to walk. This is a great project. We need to figure out alternate modes, reducing BMT for cars, providing the lower cost transportation is really important. But I see in the ratings that it wasn't rated for employment centers, the routes, which means the largest employer in Yolo County wasn't considered as a priority here. And that's a concern. UC Davis was not rated as a job hub. And I would suggest that this North Davis, Lower Connolly County, South Woodland is a really important place where people commute, and that corridor is really important. I see that you do have that as a priority, which is really important, but this replaces the, this is a very expensive off thing, but we still haven't completed the last mile between the Davis city limits and Road 29. We have a 2-foot shoulder, which is a white knuckler for me, and I'm pretty hard knuckled. Let's finish that. That's been on the list for 10 years now. It still hasn't been finished. So I don't want the perfect, this off-road Class 1 to be an enemy of the good. We need to widen that shoulder. Maybe you could just build a Class 1 up to Road 29 as soon as possible. That's really important, because that's the only way you get the good motorized bicycling. It's much more feasible to commute from Woodland to Davis to work. And again, the underrating of commutes in the scoring system really is a concern. So That's my biggest concern, and also in terms of the maintenance of the bike path, I was out at Bicycle Winters yesterday. And I saw Janet Mercurio, I don't know if you know who she has personally planted about 500 trees between Davis and Woodland out of her own pocket, and was out there watering them. And we need to support her, we need to make some sustainable, because Janet's getting a little older, so the county needs to take over that, so we have lots of good work here, so I just mentioned that, thank you for moving this ahead, but let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good, fix that 1 mile from Davis City limits to Road 29 as soon as possible.
Thank you so much for your comments. Any other comments from the public? Yes, Alex? And I forgot your name, will you please?
My name is Alex Benavides.
Oh.
I do work for Transnet, but I'm speaking as a member of the public. I'd just like to supplement the support for the trail between Woodland and Davis. This is something I've thought about doing myself, commuting to and from. Not that big of a difference distance, but I know I probably have at least 1 or 2 colleagues that would probably think about doing the same thing if the route was like guaranteed to be a little more safer, 102. So that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate your comment.
Director Warren, if
Yes.
you don't mind, me responding to Mr. Hirsch's point regarding County Road 102 to 29, that is a project in Yolo County's capital improvement plan, and it's scheduled to be widened and for the shoulders to be the same width as the rest of 102 north of 29. And construction is supposed to start next summer.
Check it out. We're doing great things. That's wonderful. If there's no further discussion, I would like to move this item.
Second.
All right, and I have the second by Director Ferris. Oh, we have more comments online. I'm so sorry.
So we have 2.
Oh, the first one.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, hi, my name's Adam Shaw. I just found out about this meeting today. I'm here because my friend who commuted from Woodland to Davis for over 20 years, Mike Lewis, was killed by a tractor on his commute to work on March 26th. And I can't help but think if there was such a bike path as is being discussed, he'd still be here today. I'm aware there have been other fatalities along these roads over the years, and I'm very glad to hear about this discussion today, and I'm glad that it is in the proposed projects. And I just really want to emphasize, like some people said, that there is a major amount of people who do commute between Woodland and Davis, and many of those people are very interested in biking. I have many colleagues. I know people who send their kids to school here in Davis. But the main point is it's very unsafe on those roads. Cars are commuting, cutting across the country roads, distracted, and it's just not safe for cyclists. And I think if we had this, you would have even more people who would use this path. And so as a major work hub, I think that would serve a lot of people. And I just thank you for your work. And I very much hope that you can find this opportunity to get that project across the line, because I know this has been discussed in the past. And I just would like to not see this fall by the wayside like previous attempts. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have a question for you. Can you please repeat the name of your friend who was lost from your cyclist friend?
Yeah, his name is Michael Casper Lewis.
Thank you very much, and I'm sorry about his loss. And Arden's. All right. You have another public comment? Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Hello. Yes, Lutz Röniger from also working at UC Davis. And the comment was, the plan for the bike path is potentially foreseeing something like 5 years, 10 years down the road, there might be a bike path. On the other hand, yeah, because the commute between Davis and Woodland is really dangerous since the cars are driving so fast on the country roads, perhaps initially could at least something be done to slow down the cars on Road 29 or 102. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your comments. Are there any more?
No more public comments on there.
I really appreciate those public comments, and we have a motion. I made the motion. There's a second by Director Frericks. All in favor of supporting the staff recommendation, and it was two parts, and going to the board of supervisors. All in favor? Aye.
I,
Opposed? All right, I'm really excited about this. Yeah, let's go to, I wanted to just take a minute and thank Brenda Lamelli. I'm so sorry, I was just gonna run into this. Brian Avenant, Adrian Engel, I really appreciate your work, but mainly Brenda. Thank you. All right, thank you so much. We're gonna move to item 8, which is the fourth and hope grand jury response recommendation.
All right, and while we're doing a change of crew here, I want to just welcome YoloTD, who's coming back to follow up with you after presenting this item last month.
Good to see you. Thank you for coming back.
Yes, thank you all so much for having me back this evening. Again, I'm YoloTD, Senior Transportation Planner. And I am here to provide an update on the 30-day comment period that is board directed for the expansion of the Beeline service into Northeast Woodland, including the which would include the Fourth and Hope facility. So the staff recommendation is a few parts here: to close the 30-day comment period, approve the Beeline expansion, and direct staff to provide an update to the board after the service changes have been in effect for 3 months, with additional periodic updates as requested. And so as background, last month, April 14th, you directed staff to open a 30-day comment period for possible Beeline expansion into Northeast Woodland. And you also asked that we look for additional Beeline stops to add to the area. And as a reminder, again, the Beeline expansion suggestion is for Northeast Woodland, shown here in purple. And it does have a high number of current jobs, but is expected to grow even further. At the meeting last month, I had shared 3 possible locations for Beeline expansion stops. At your request, I was able to, although to say that, yes, we can provide one at the Yolo Food Bank. That is in a location that's currently already served by Beeline. It's not within the purple area shown previously, but we didn't have a stop identified there, and we were able to find one that works for ADA compliance. So thank you for that. And I will say, for the actual expansion, as we know and discussed last month, the area is not well suited for with sidewalks and things that we typically would like to look for ADA compliance. And so we are happy to find more locations. For example, the County Office of Education was one that was brought up recently. We believe that is something that can be served, and we can look at that as part of the expansion before it goes live. But by no means is this an exhaustive list of locations that we can offer Beeline stops in the future. This is definitely just a starting point in this new location, and we are happy to and find new stops as we can in this area. It would likely be on a sort of a case-by-case basis, and as requests come in, because it is not that pedestrian friendly and for people with who use ADA devices, but that is something that we are happy to handle. I will say, for public comments, during the 30-day comment period, we updated our website to invite public comments and to come through our customer service email or phone line. And we also shared the website with Fourth and Hope staff who were here at the meeting last month. We received 10 comments. You have 9 of those in your packet, and we did receive another one late Friday. which is in your additional comment packet as well. So that means a total of 10 comments were received. So again, for staff recommendation, close a 30-day comment period, approve beeline expansion, and then direct us to provide you an update at 3 months after the service has gone into effect with a periodic updates as requested. The 3 months was something that the CAC requested specifically. And so with that, then, next steps would be to close the 30-day comment period, approve expansion. We would start advertising and expanding service late next month. We would start the advertising and then expand the service late next month. And then we can, after that, come back with an update.
Excellent. Do any of the directors have any questions, clarifying questions on this before we go to public comment so we may close the public hearing? All right, I'd like to accept any public comments on this item. Come on up, Mr. Barnbaum.
Thank you, Vice Chair Lorna. We worked really hard as a team on this. There was a lot of public comment from the folks at Fourth and Hope. As you're well aware at previous board meetings, I think this is an expansion well worth what everyone has come to the table to this evening, based on the work done in the past months leading up to tonight. My hope is, and I kind of sound like a broken record on this, but as you know, I hope that even this can get more beeline buses if a fixed route is provided in winters, and then the beeline buses there can get transferred into Woodland. Then they would get more beeline service. Winters gets its fixed route, and the residents in Winters area know when the bus is coming because it's on a printed schedule. So yes, that will be in this coming budget year, my first priority, with the second one being the 16 trips to be added on the 42 A and B, but I did see that's in the 28-29 fiscal year. So with all that being said, and the knowledge of the staff presentation tonight, I'm happy to recommend moving this item forward, starting the service in late June and going through the budget review process as recommended by staff. And so therefore I recommend everything mentioned in the entire item for tonight for item number 8, and we'll go on record as saying such. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any other public comment in person? Public comments online, aside from the 10 comments that we've received?
No public comments online.
All right. Yes, Director Frericks.
Yeah, thanks. Well, first of all, glad to see that the Public Defender's Office is so supportive of this item. The vast majority of our public comments came from them. That was good. Glad to see that. Just wanted to check in though, specifically, well, you mentioned it in that presentation, just on the Yolo Office of Education, Yolo County Office of Education. There's hundreds of employees there. Many of them live in Woodland. Like I mean, I know, I think I heard maybe we haven't 100% determined if there's a ADA accessible like landing area or something, pick up or drop over. I mean, it's in I don't know where that would be, but that building certainly is ADA accessible. So I'm not sure where the pickup or drop off area is, but I am quite confident that it is going to be a very well utilized stop if there's one added there. So just wanting to raise that again. So, and that's I'm very supportive otherwise of the staff report and the item and moving ahead.
Any other comments? This is excellent work. Really proud that we, have done so much up here. I'm looking for motions.
I'll move the item, but I guess I'm gonna reframe that into a question. So I'll make my comment as more of a question then. What is going to be done about the Yolo County Office of Education location for a possible beeline stop? That's.
Yes, thank you. So that one, we I'll take a step back. We try to have our stops on roadways themselves that serve, have sidewalks and ADA compliant. And so because this is in a location that is not, Google Street View doesn't go into the parking lot, so we didn't have time to go out there ourselves to see where in the parking lot we could serve. It just requires additional space for our vehicles to go into the parking lot and turn around, and which is fine. It's just more time for our operators in between picking people up and dropping them off at their next location. Not a big deal, but something to be aware of, that we are working on it. It's sort of a TBD. We do intend to serve that location. It's just where in the parking lot can we get them, can we get our stop placed in order to have ADA compliant path for our riders.
And so, go ahead. And is that something that can be done by staff without bringing it back to the board? Because we brought this up in Superman, the director for that today, and I know we talked about it the last time this time came up.
Yeah, my understanding is yes, that is something that the location of the stops within this expanded area does not need board approval. It is just by having this large area of service, then we can add stops as needed, as requested by the public, and as we deem them to be compliant, and it's just a back end item that we would just send to RideCo, who's the manager and the software provider for.
And if I may, Director Vega, I just want to remind the board that, this is not people can't get drop off anywhere, not only because of ADA compliance, but also because we're trying to serve a lot of people with this service. And so the more bespoke stops we have, if you will, that impacts everyone. Like we talked about the fact that just expanding to this area is going to impact everyone using the service in Woodland because they're having to share it. So we want to strike that right balance of having enough stops, but this is not a door-to-door service like paratransit, because that would just be that much more expensive.
A follow-up. So when folks started to request that stop, would you collect data to gauge demand and then make the change?
I want to look at Daisy Romero, because she is our director, our transit operations, and Daisy and her team meet with Beeline, with RideCo weekly to look at what's happening with our ridership data, and so I'll let her speak to exactly what happens when we get those requests.
Just one other just quick item to add into the mix, if it's okay, just on this item, because I totally appreciate the issues of obviously ADA compliance. Need to be supportive of that, of course, following the law, but the food bank stop, there's no sidewalks in front of the food bank on Harder. I mean, there's no sidewalks along Harder, so that is apparently okay.
So you are correct, not on Harder, but it's on. It's in the staff report has the actual name of the street, but it very similar to the Target distribution center. There's no sidewalks like along the roadway itself, but there is oddly enough, a ADA compliant pathway from the roadway into the parking lot, which is also ADA compliant. So our operators can let someone out on that pathway, and they would have an easy path of travel. Great.
Okay.
Excellent.
But good point. Bluegrass Place, thank you.
Oh.
Yes,
didn't think
I
of
know,
that.
very tiny.
And we have this update in 3 months, but would that item be something that could be either updated in this, Autumn's executive director report, or at a meeting? Maybe in a month, would it?
In a month.
Well,
On that
on
particular
that
item.
particular item, just to update us. Or is that too soon? I'm asking, I'm
I'm looking at
specifically
people that have to
asking
do the work.
where,
Like the bus stop, like to.
just where it would
Or
start
the Office of
at
Education.
the Office of Education. Is that something could be informed about?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we should be able to move pretty quickly. I think I just didn't have enough time to actually go out there, as our senior planner pointed out, to actually look at the area. All I can tell from Google Maps from that specific location, it was essentially kind of like in a court, and each point of entry was literally a driveway. So the question was like, do we just drop them off in the middle of the driveway, or can we actually go into the building? So I was concerned more with just the safety of literally dropping someone someone off in a driveway, regardless if they needed the ramp or not.
Yeah, the entrance to the building is actually inside, in the interior of the parking
Yeah.
lot, so all the entrances stuff.
Exactly, so then it was just more of a question of like, yes, absolutely, we can serve that area, it's just a matter of where, is it the front door of the Yolo County, Department of Education? But we just didn't have the time to actually go out there, at least not the day, to go look.
I just want to point out that Daisy took a much needed vacation this month. Between last board meeting and this one.
Thank you so much.
But yes, we should be able to serve, and we will be able to update you guys.
Thank you so much, Stacy. Director Vega, do you have more?
Just, I was ready to second, Director Burke's motion.
All right, we have a motion by Director Ferks, we have a second by Director Vega, and all in favor? All right, I'd like to close also the public hearing at 8:06, and this motion passes. Thank you very much. Thank you for all your incredible work. And I hope you had a good vacation. All right. We're moving to administrative reports, and we're gonna begin with board member reports. There must be reports about cap to cap or the SACOG mission to look at streets and housing. Any reports? Any reports? Yes.
I don't have something. I brought a souvenir from the trip at home. I just, something that stood out to me was during the SACOG study mission trip before Cap to Cap, and one of our tour guides said, make the investment early on. It's gonna cost you less in terms of transportation planning, and that I took that away, and I've been thinking about it because it's striking that balance, right? We just had our budget projections and looking at the lack of available capital, and then even when we have capital, the maintenance, and how do you balance that with putting in the investment up front so that it's cheaper in the long run? And I don't know the answer to that, but I'm bringing you back that message that was shared from our transportation planners back east that were our hosts to think about doing that and somehow making it all pencil out. I also, we visited some areas that were underserved communities, and we heard some anecdotes around, well, bus routes that may not be heavily I guess packed with passengers, but to those passengers that are on, it means the world to them. So that also, as somebody that grew up taking the bus to school, and my parents and my mom predominantly using it to get around to the places where she works. She was a house cleaner as I was growing up, and she depended on that. So oftentimes she was, one of maybe 2 or 3 riders, but it was something that she needed. So those are the takeaways that I took and brought home with me, and I'm going to continue to think about this.
Incredible takeaways. We sat next to each other on the bus pretty often. And along with the comments, there was that the planners planned the grid, they planned a dedicated bus lane for buses, just, with the streets and bike lanes. So they were planned, and then houses came in instead of the other way that a lot of cities like Winners do, where there's a subdivision and then, suddenly there's roads that are kind of different. So, yeah, thank you. All right, we will have our executive director's report.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for those reports, and I'm sorry I couldn't join you. It sounds like it was a really cool report. First, great news, I want to welcome, she's not here tonight, but I want to welcome to the team Haley Osser-Zelaya, who is our new communications and marketing specialist. She joins us from Civic Well, where she worked for many years. I know a number of you know Civic Well, so we're sorry to Bernadette and the Civic Well team, but we're very happy to have Haley. Her first day was Monday. So I know we've been kind of shorthanded in terms of helping support some of the outreach and engagement that's happening in your communities. So with Haley on board, feel free to bring those requests in, and we'll do what we can to be to become once again good partners in marketing, communicating around all of the transportation needs and events and everything that we do together. Our Beeline service expansion in Winters launched 2 weeks ago. In Winters and Knights Landing, I should say. We've had a great response so far. In fact, we tied for the highest ridership week in Winters, the first week that service expansion launched, which is incredible. Given that it was a soft launch, we weren't heavily marketing it, but people responded right away. We didn't see a similar ridership bump in Knights Landing the first week, but we did see that the demand spread out. And in particular, a lot of people were riding later in the evening once that later service became available. And we had a big drop in failed searches, which was really one of the key indicators for us that people were trying to get rides and were unable to. So we had the lowest rate in failed searches since December, again, during that first week that we launched the service expansion. So some very kind of rapid response to show that like people are really responding very quickly to that service expansion. So I just want to share some of that news with the board. Happy May is Bike Month. You should have seen a bag there at your chairs with your flag. You get your socks and your bell, courtesy of Brenda and Brian and the YOLO commute team. See, for the record, I want to note that Vice Chair Lauren is wearing her Bike Month socks. It's been a great year already. Our incentive program where we provide through YOLO commute incentives for people to fix up their bike or buy a new bike or an e-bike. It's sold out. The fastest ever on record, in fact, because it opens April 1 to get people ready, and we were actually sold out before the first day of May. So that was a new record in terms of tapping out of those incentives. So we're very excited to see that program is really getting such a positive response. And then lastly, I wanted to note on the Woodland Transit Center, some of you have asked for what's happening with that. We have been working at the staff level with City of Woodland, and we now have an ad hoc meeting scheduled coming up to report on what we've been doing at the staff level and hope to get some good input from the ad hoc committee. As well, we've been working on drafting an RFP, a request for proposals for security services at the County Fair Mall, and we hope to be bringing that to you on a consent calendar very soon. And that concludes my report.
Excellent. We take away Transdev.
Sure, just a little bit of staffing update. So we're really focusing on staffing. This last week we had a job fair. Thank you, Daisy. A job fair that went really well. So we currently have 64 active operators, 13 trainees. And 9 of them are brand new in class that started yesterday. So we're really hopeful for that. We currently have 2 trainers that are here supporting regional support rather, to get those folks trained. So things are looking good.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And the long range calendar?
Right. My eyes are not as good as Phil, so I'm gonna have to look at this in my packet as well. I don't know how he's able to read that. It's crazy. All right, so just kind of a quick sneak peek on what's coming up. Of course, you have on May 27th, don't forget our special transit funding workshop. We look forward to seeing you all here on that is the Tuesday, the day after Labor Day, after Memorial Day. We have some great speakers lined up. I really hope folks can make it. And then our next regular meeting on June 9th, we'll be asking for you to take action on the proposed budget and work plan that you heard tonight. We'll also be discussing a potential extension of an MOU with the City of West Sacramento and SAC-RT to continue a pilot service of the West Sacramento on-demand via service that is going into downtown Sacramento. So we talked with you about that. We are looking at a 1-year contract extension. We'll be asking for your support for a 1-year contract extension for Transdev for our transit operations service while we work on a new RFP and that new procurement that I mentioned in the work plan and budget item. And we'll be receiving our audited financial statements for the last fiscal year at that meeting. In July, we've got a placeholder that if needed, if we need a third bite at the apple on the budget, that will come back to you in July. We're looking forward to having a workshop on possible service change scenarios for the short range transit plan. An update on the phase out of Connect card and our transition to contactless payments. And then for YoloTD, we'll be diving into some of the keyword products that we're working on there. And then finally, we do not currently have a meeting scheduled for August. We try to give you a month off in August. So right now our next meeting is scheduled for September, where we'll be bringing you the long-term capital improvement plan. An update on YOLO commute. That's our project that runs May is Bike Month, which we're doing a commute, or an organizational study for that, because there's a very large expansion of YOLO commute funded as well by the YOLO 80 mitigation project. So we want to share, what does that look like for this project to, or YOLO commute to essentially become a much bigger program than it is today. And then more action on fair payment methods. So that's what's coming up in the next 3 months. Don't want to miss a minute. It's going to be exciting in here. And that concludes the long range calendar.
Any comments on the long range calendar? All right, I would like to remind everybody that our next meeting is Tuesday, May 27th, 2025 at 6 p.m. And I would like to close, would you like to make a comment? Okay, we'll have a public comment on the long range calendar, yes.
This is our needs, staff report. I suggested when you're looking for transit, we should also contact RT. Maybe they could provide service. We talked about SMUD providing utility service at Yolo County, maybe that RT might be an alternate source for service. And brings more of the stuff in-house, public employees, better services that might be appropriate. And also, I am now faced with a dilemma. Do I go to County Fair Mall and wait 20 minutes in the dark for the next bus, or do I ride home on 99, which is unlit with whatever lights I have? Thank you.
Be safe. I'm going to adjourn tonight's meeting in memory of cyclist Michael Casper Lewis, who was mentioned tonight, and meeting is adjourned at 8:17.